house when I was 10 and I didn't know anyone in the area. My dad had a friend who was a single mom who had 3 kids. Luckily, there was a girl a few years older than me. She was 12 when I met her and we had known each other for a few years. We weren't very close, but one night we struck up a friendship. My friend Rob was hanging out with her and her little brother. They were home alone because my friend's mom was at work. His mom was helping this woman at work and got to know her pretty well. She had found out that her sister was in a mental hospital, and on a recent night that Rob was hanging out with my friend, they knocked on the door. My friend thought it was their mom because she knocked on the door a certain way and she answered without thinking that Rob wasn't supposed to be there, and she went through the window and into her house across the street. She never thought twice about it. It wasn't her mom, it was the sister of the woman whose mom was helping. And she talked to her sister and figured out where her family lived and her mom's work schedule so she could get here. I don't know the details and I'm glad I don't know. My friend's younger brother went to the neighbor's house to call the police. Delaney brutally murdered my friend the week after Christmas and dumped her body naked in a bathtub. He even hit her in the head. They had to see the presents and I don't know where they got it, but they wouldn't let me go to her funeral. Music. It happened to my wife's grandmother about 15 years ago when we were still dating. Her husband had died about a year ago, but she was going to the library and socializing as a volunteer this winter, so it was time for her to come back when it was dark. The library closes at 5 o'clock and there was some extra work before everyone left, and on this particular night she had declined a ride from another volunteer because she needed to be healthy. The house is about a mile away through some lightly wooded area in South Texas. As he was halfway home, he noticed someone walking in the same direction behind him and bumped into him, which in itself wasn't particularly fast, but in this case he seemed vaguely creepy. They were walking pretty soon. He was right behind her. Then he slowed down while he was behind her. Now he knew something was up, but he was almost home. He could see the top of his driveway coming up and he was turning on his lights. He had another 150 yards and 100 yards to go when he got inside. He said he was so close he could feel his breath on his neck. Maybe 50 yards later, a strong hand on his shoulder said, "Okay, don't turn around and give me your purse or I'll cut you off." He paused for a second, then took it. He took a step forward and shot the man in the neck, the $38 she kept in her purse. The man spent the next 5 years in a prison hospital and died of complications. My wife's grandmother passed away last year, but she eventually said sadly that she pulled the trigger too early when I was little. I would say 8 to 11 years. My older sister, who was 7, looked after the kids when my parents were out. She smoked a lot and my parents would let her smoke outside, of course, so I would get annoyed watching her play outside. One day my sister noticed a car sitting at the end of the driveway on the side of the road. It was a white SUV with a bike rack on top and the windows were the most colorful I've ever seen. She couldn't see in from the side. She went in, then drove to the end of the road and sat in the parking lot of the garage and waited, then went out for a smoke and it would be the same thing again. But my sister is a brave woman and kind of ignored it, until the next day when my parents were out again and it showed up again. It sat at the end of the driveway and just watched. I don't know what the driver was doing, but he was watching my sister, because if I hadn't gone outside, I would have looked out the front window and it would have been sitting there staring at my sister. He told my dad, who was a sheriff's deputy at the time. He called the police and reported it, and they showed up, but the SUV was nowhere to be seen. Months went by, and then one day, 9 months later, it started happening, and since the last time we saw it, it had become a regular occurrence. Another day my sister was outside doing her bad habit, and this time we were alone as usual and she decided she'd had enough. She told me to stay in the carport and she was going to go face them. She started walking toward the SUV and halfway down the driveway she said to us. I was like, oops Turturro, like I knew if I went any further I was going to die. I was paralyzed with fear. She turned around and went inside. Eventually the family car was at the shop, so we were all stuck in the house for the night. My sister went outside to smoke while my parents were at home. I went outside with her and the SUV finally arrived. She told me to run inside and tell my dad, and I did. My dad immediately started walking quickly towards the SUV with his gun in hand, but it wasn't leveled at him. The SUV dropped to the ground and came out onto a nearby major highway. My dad, as a cop, noticed the year and model and the distinguishing features. The most terrifying thing was the license plate was covered with duct tape and we never saw it again. I was only 4 or 5 years old and my parents had just separated. My mom lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but whenever I wanted to sleep, I preferred to sleep in her bed. When I lived with her, our 2 bedrooms were at the very end of the hallway, opposite each other. Our apartment was on the first floor and I remember it was the middle of summer and there was a window open in my mom's room, which was right behind the bed. By the way, I woke up in the middle of the night and I remember sitting up and seeing our cat sitting on the door frame of my mom's room. I remember her door was open, then you could see partially into my bedroom. It was weird because our cat usually stayed in bed with us when I was watching her. She came into my bedroom and woke me up by facing my mom. I woke her up within 3 to 4 seconds and asked her what happened. We both looked back at the door frame and there was a man standing next to my open door, coming out of the bedroom. I still don't know how he managed to do it so quickly, but my mom picked me up and literally threw me out the screen window. He quickly followed and we were able to scream for help and someone called 911. The police arrived but saw no sign of forced entry. Only our front door was open, which led them to believe that the man must have come out that way. The strange thing is, my mother swore repeatedly that she had locked the door with the deadbolt and chain lock that night. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen and opened the cupboard by our water heater and found a notebook with a name and a drawing, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The police were called again, but they could only assume that the man was in our house and had been hiding until we went to sleep. Music, applause. One day while I was doing laundry, a light in my basement went out. My basement is set up in such a way that the laundry room is separated from the other side. There is a wall of doors to the basement. To get upstairs you have to go out of the laundry room and go through another part of the basement, so the other part was a light blue color, not the laundry room because that was the only light. It was pretty dark. I finished doing laundry because I was afraid to walk through the dark basement. I got out of the laundry room and got halfway down the basement and I heard a loud bang. Imagine the sounds people make when they imitate a witch, and imagine the witch has been smoking for 50 years. His voice became deeper and more hoarse. That's what I heard clearly in the daylight. I didn't hesitate to go up the stairs. I waited for my dad to come home and then changed the light bulb. I still hadn't heard that call and I hadn't told anyone at home about it. Music. This happened to a friend of mine. She told me about it about a year ago. We'll call her Minji. She was in her early 20s and working as an English teacher in South Korea one evening a few years ago. She was a high school tutor. The boy at school had been up quite late studying and the bus had stopped because it was too far from her house. The boy asked if he could crash on her floor at night and get on the first bus in the morning. Minji was very reluctant because it didn't seem like a good idea to invite a teenage student to stay the night, but he kept begging her and finally she gave in. They went back to her one-room apartment and she climbed up the wall of the bed. He spreads a blanket on the floor and they both fall asleep. A few hours later, probably around 2 a.m., the boy wakes Minji up. "I'm really hungry," he says. "Let's get some food." Minji opens her eyes and looks at him incredulously. Food is at 2 a.m. Go back to bed, but the student insists. "No, I'm really hungry. Let's eat something now." He tells her there's some ramen in the kitchen and she can fix herself, which doesn't satisfy her. She doesn't want ramen. There's a 24-hour place just down the street. Let's go there. Finally, after a few minutes of persuasion, the boy takes Minji with him to the restaurant. They leave the apartment and as soon as they get to the street, the boy turns to Minji and says, "I'm not hungry. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's a man sleeping there." They call the police and find out that a homeless man has been sleeping under the bed in Minji's apartment for 2 months. The boy could only see her because she was lying on the floor, so he had a clear view of her under the bed. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The road was a 2-lane, shortcut road through complete emptiness. Amboy is an abandoned town, which is as low as Death Valley, so in the afternoon I was driving alone and I went up the mountain between Amboy and I-40. When I got to the top, I was driving north, through a valley with tall grass on both sides of the road. Ahead, I saw some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approached, I slowed down. A red Pontiac Fiero was parked on both sides of the road. A suitcase was open, with trash scattered everywhere and 2 bodies lying face down on the road. A man and a woman. I stopped 100 feet away and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. As a Marine, I reached under the seat and pulled out a 9mm pistol and chambered it. Something felt very wrong. It felt very perfect, as if it had been arranged in an ambush. Something was just wrong. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could pass the man on the road. The man on his left was turning right at the woman behind the Fiero and I was on the other side. I threw it into first gear and drove the line. I planned past the back of the Fiero without hitting any bodies in the road. I moved forward a few hundred feet and started walking slowly so I could catch my breath and get my heart rate down. Looking up in the rearview mirror, I saw 2 bodies knee-deep and about 20 people emerging from the tall grass on either side of the road next to the car. At that moment, my right foot pushed the gas pedal to the floor and wouldn't stop until I had to slow down for the I-40 eastbound ramp. I never know what would have happened to me if I had gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or had pulled over near them. Some friends and I were fishing on the James River at night. We were sitting on the bank, a nice fire burning, and the usual lazy conversation. And with a few beers, suddenly everyone stopped talking, as if a switch had been flipped. We were all looking across the river and it felt like someone was looking back. It was a very uncomfortable feeling that reflected, as some of the group tried to shudder with their usual masculine humor. Then a blood-curdling sound came from the other bank that stopped everyone in their tracks. The sound was like nothing I had ever heard before, and it made every hair on my body shiver and shiver. I can only describe it as sounding like a wild person with no linguistic knowledge, no words, just this loud blood-curdling scream. No one moved or said a word. We all just sat there staring at each other, when suddenly a second scream was let out, louder than the first. By this time, a few of us were running towards our truck parked a few yards away, while we retrieved various firearms. We all sat there quietly, our eyes fixed on the opposite bank, watching the light of our fire reflected off the rocks. We sat there waiting for another scream or for it to move in the other direction. The river finally suddenly came a third scream, but this time it came from our bushes on the riverbank. We all emerged from the bushes about a yard away, leaving most of our belongings behind as we reached our truck. Then we heard the screams again just beyond the tree line. We all lay on the floor from there and never figured out what the sound was. It was Friday night and my friend was picking me up from my house in his car. I was in a hurry because we were late for a hockey game in town. We were having such a good time in the car that I didn't even notice that my phone was missing. I looked for the car seat on the floor, but it wasn't in the car. I was sure I had forgotten it while playing hockey. I couldn't help but think that maybe my phone had fallen somewhere, so I borrowed my friend's phone and ran to the bathroom. I dialed my number and hoped that someone at my house would pick up the phone. It rang 3 times before someone picked up, but they were silent on the other end. I screamed into the phone and said I was just checking. I left my phone at home and they didn't call. I assumed my little brother was messing with me, so I hung up. I got home late at night and my parents weren't home. I went inside and called them to tell them where they were. They told me they had gone out to eat at the park with my younger brother and to see a concert. They said they left shortly after the game ended. They would be back home in about half an hour. So I hung up and started looking for my cell phone. But then I realized, how could anyone in my family pick up my phone if no one was home? I felt a pain in my stomach. Fear was filling my chest. At that moment, I heard the back door of my house opening and closing. I immediately ran to the neighbors through the front door and called the police. It seemed like the back door was open and someone had broken into their house. Nothing was stolen, but the scariest thing was that we might have slept with a stranger in the house a while ago. A family moved in next door to my family. They had a son who was very naughty. He was addicted to slasher movies and always wanted me to talk about the events that happened to me while I was working in Vietnam, which no normal person would want to hear. He also loved to hurt stray animals. This guy was 19 years old at the time and my daughter was 7, but he always wanted to talk to her. He would start talking to her when he got home from school. He would talk to her over the fence while she was playing in the back. But what really shocked me was when he tried to talk to her. I looked at him and his parents told him to stay away from her, and I never wanted to see her again. That's when things got weird. I was scared at my neighbor's house. At this point I booked it and told them that someone was in my house, and now I could see the lights on and my daughter's room was on and there was a silhouette moving around. When the deputies went in, they found the neighbor upset. They were waiting in my daughter's room, with a nice little setup in her closet. She said she likes to watch her sleep in the moonlight. I got a call from my neighbor. That scary guy was telling me something like, "We saw you awake," so she called and said our son was missing. I went by his room to use the bathroom. His door was open, which was unusual, and we needed help finding him. The phone call woke me up, even though I didn't, so I asked why they were thinking I was like, "Oh, he saw you walk upstairs and the lights were on." My blood ran cold. I passed out on the couch, and I know no one turned on any lights. I hung up the lights, ran outside to my truck to grab my shotgun, but noticed the sheriff coming to my neighbor's house. I booked it and told them that someone was in my house, and now I could see the lights on and my daughter's room was on and a silhouette was moving around. When the deputies went inside, they found the neighbor upset. They were waiting in my daughter's room. She had a nice little setup in her closet. She said she likes to watch her sleep in the moonlight.